Near mint condition, the home of collected editions.
That cover's so awesome.
Absolute format is the best way to own this store. Time to empty those wallets and fill those shelves. Hey, all you minties, Uncanny Omar here from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And join me today for your overview of the Dead Boy Detectives Omnibus from DC Comics. So let's go ahead and get started. And welcome back, everybody. So just in time for Halloween, Spooktober, or spooky season, whatever the hell you want to call it, comes the latest in the Sandman Universe Classics Omnibus editions, and that is the Dead Boy Detectives, with this cover here by Chris Bachalo. I want to say, I think that's his signature right here, but this is one that I wasn't really familiar with. I've read Books of Magic before and Lucifer, and this is one that I just remember the characters because my wife reminded me that they had appeared in Sandman 25. But here's what the spine looks like. And you have both of the characters up here, Edwin and Charles, the Dead Boy Detectives. And that, by the way, magnifying glass. I really like the design of this spine. Toby Liff and Mark Buckingham, Jill Thompson, Neil Gaiman, Ed Brubaker, and Brian Talbot. And then the DC logo down there, which they've been using instead of the Black Label, the DC Black Label line. But this is part of the DC Black Label line. Best Friends from Beyond the Grave. A little synopsis as to what this is and some of the creators that you're going to find through here. And then the ISBN down here, with the retail price of the book being $100. So let's go back to the front here. This makes him look a little bit older here. Let's look underneath the dust jacket, and actually let's look at the flaps first. So here we have about the creators like Toby Litt, Mark Buckingham, and Jill Thompson. Now let's see what life's got to offer us. That's the ending of Sandman 25. So I'll talk a little bit about the premise here and the plot. But first, let's look at the design of the art on board. So it is a connecting image of both the boys, Charles and Edwin. And there you have a better look with the Dead Boy Detectives logo up there, Omnibus, and the DC logo right there in that nose hole, that skull. Okay, we're going to crack this book open, talk about the stories found in here, when to perhaps read the stories because they do jump all over the place, but it will be a suggestion as to when to read these as if you're reading Sandman for the first time. Okay, let's go ahead and crack this book open. Hey, there we have some thumbprints because we are talking about detective stories in here. And the Dead Boy Detectives Omnibus. Here are all the creators. Toby Litt, Mark Buckingham, Jill Thompson taking the top billing. Mark Buckingham, Jill Thompson, Brian Talbot, and Chris Bachalo, as well as Peter Gross doing some of the pencils here. And then your inkers like Jill Thompson and Ryan Kelly. Although Ryan Kelly actually ends up as a finisher when he is finishing Mark Buckingham's layouts. And a bunch of other inkers, as well as your colorists here, like Lee Luthridge and Daniel Vozo, and Todd Klein, Jill Thompson, John Costanza doing some of the lettering, as well as others. And then the collection cover artist being Chris Bachalo. And here is the table of contents, where you're going to find each of these stories based on the page number. And you have a foreword by Steve Yockey, and an introduction by Mark Buckingham. This right here tells you a little bit about the study of death and how people have obsessed with death over the years. No matter what kind of stories you're reading, there's always characters that obsess over what happens after you die. The introduction by Mark Buckingham here is a really pretty introduction. It doesn't go into detail at all, so you can read both of these. There are no spoilers as to what the stories are about. But this is more of a memory, like a throwback to how his connection with Neil Gaiman started, and then he even asked Neil Gaiman if he remembered coming up with the concept of these two boys becoming detectives after they left the school, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a second. And sure enough, Neil Gaiman remembered a little bit, but then he found the original script, and in the original script, Neil Gaiman kind of wrote the idea of like, well, maybe these two boys will wander to the earth and solve crimes together. And I thought that was really interesting because it kind of ties it back to like Fables. Mark Buckingham talks about how Bill Willingham in Fables was wrapping up stories, yet opening up ideas for future stories. And he loved that about those writing and helping to create those characters in Fables. But let's talk about this. So we kick it off with Sandman number 25. This is all part of the Seasons of the Mist storyline. This is actually part 4. So in here, you're going to find Sandman 25, as well as the Dead Boy Detectives 1 through 12. Sandman presents the Dead Boy Detectives 4-issue miniseries, The Children's Crusade 1 and 2, Ghost number 1, The Witching Hour number 1, Time Warp number 1, and Doom Patrol Annual number 2, as well as Swamp Thing Annual number 2, and that's just material from those particular stories. You do have the whole issue here. Now, when I say it's part 4, it's chapter 4 of an ongoing story. Is that going to be confusing? Not really. Because as most people that have read Sandman know that there are standalone stories, yet overall arcs that tie everything together. The only thing that might be confusing during this particular time is the status of Hell. If you've read Lucifer, if you've read Sandman, you know the status of Hell during this time. And that pretty much is that Hell has been emptied of its residents. And now, because of that, is why you have a bunch of demons running around here in the school. So let's go back to the very first page where you have this young boy right here and this ghostly looking boy up here. So who we meet here are Charles Rowland, who's sitting there on the floor feeling really cold. This is December of 1990. And then you have Edwin Payne, who is this boy that looks like an apparition, and he's kind of looking over Charles as he's laying there dying. You have a little cameo of Sandman, and Charles starts talking about his dreams he was having. And as it turns out, there's a series of flashbacks here that you get to find out exactly how Charles ended up in this attic with Edwin. And it is revealed that Edwin got murdered in the early 1900s. I think it was like 1915, 1916 when Edwin died. And this is 1990. So Edwin is a ghost, and he tells Charles about his brutal murder, why they did it, and this whole school that they're attending is just messed up. And as you get to find out, there's a lot more ghosts roaming around at St. Hilarions than originally Charles thought. So what happens as you get to find out, you see that it starts off like a week ago, then it goes to 6 days ago, then 4 days ago. He gets kidnapped by these 3 demon-looking creatures that are dressed as schoolboys. And what they're doing is they're trying to summon some kind of demon. But this ritual isn't working, and they're the 3 demons that also did the same thing to Edwin in 1916. So they end up hurting Charles and leaving him for dead. And Edwin takes him up to the attic to help him. He tells him his bones are there. And sadly, Charles doesn't make it. Charles ends up dying. Keep in mind, this is like part 4 of an ongoing story that has nothing to do with these kids. This is the last time you see these kids in Sandman. Death appears. So if you're familiar with that character from the pages of Sandman, she appears here and is trying to take Charles with her. She's like, hey, I don't have time for this. There's all kinds of things going on that you have no idea about. Come with me. And he's like, no. What about Edwin? We got to take him. And she's like, well, he decided to stay. And he was like, well, you know what? I'll just stay here. And together they decide to stay here on the living realm as ghosts. And both of them walk out of the school. At first, Edwin didn't know if that was possible to do. But I do love this line. Now let's see what life's got to offer us. And that's kind of where everything... Well, no, that isn't kind of. That's where everything begins. Now, nowhere here do you see the words detectives or dead... Well, I guess you do see the words dead boy. But the detective aspects happens in the next story arc, which is the Children's Crusade. The big crossover that Vertigo did within the annuals, like Swamp Thing. Now, those aren't collected in full, but the main story that focuses these 2 characters is. And this is when you find out that both of them are now private eyes, or detectives for hire, if you will. So during this particular story, we have some missing children, and they get to meet this young lady right here. This is Avril Mitchell, and she is hiring them to go and find her missing brother. And of course, that ties into the whole Children's Crusade storyline, which is an overall arc that was going through the pages of Vertigo during that time. Eventually, they do get their own shot at a miniseries. Actually, let's before we talk about the miniseries, let's just show off some of this artwork through here because this storyline goes on for quite some time, and it takes a big chunk of this particular omnibus. And this isn't collected in the Sandman Omnis or not in full the Books of Magic Omnibus. Here's the Winter's Edge storyline right here. This is a really cute story where both of them are just crushing on these two girls, even though they're dead boys. And then we get to the 4-issue miniseries. So in the 4-issue miniseries, this is written by Ed Brubaker and drawn by Brian Talbot. They seem to have aged a little bit. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way that Brian Talbot drew the characters. But they do feel different than the characters we met through the Children's Crusade that were helping out Tim Hunter, the character from Books of Magic. But this particular story revolves around this young girl, Marcia, who's hiring them again, and she doesn't realize that they're dead or not that great at detectives, to go out there and find out who is kidnapping these her friends, like people her age, and killing them and dying in horrible ways. There are some cameos here from characters from Sandman. Mad Hetty shows up through here. You know, you always have to have a story with a witch. And then we're introduced to another character through these pages, and that is the what is it? The Marquis of the Marquess, and his name is Francisco Marquez. This particular character, it kind of looks like Doctor Strange. So at first you're like, do I trust this guy, or is he teaming up with them, or what exactly is he doing? And then we get these little short stories here. This is the one where they go and try to help Maggie Rosendale and her little sister Libby. They're trying to find their cat. And I love the forms of payments that they have. Like they take. They take all these sorts of different types of payments. And that all leads to the ongoing series. And this is Dead Boy Detectives that introduces us to another new character. But this time around, it is Toby Litt and Mark Buckingham uniting forces. Now, both of these boys are dead. But in this story arc, this lasts for 12 issues, because the series unfortunately got canceled, we're introduced to this young lady named Crystal Palace. Pretty cool name. And she is alive, so she kind of becomes, you know, their friend, their third person in this detective agency, dealing with supernatural things. And the three main, I would say 3 to 4 main stories in this particular ongoing series. And this is when I got really hooked. Like, it's weird to say this, but Ed Brubaker's story just didn't do anything for me. It just kind of felt like a run-of-the-mill detective story that had some occult elements to it. But this was a lot of fun. And I don't know if anybody was reading this series at the time, because I didn't even hear about this series. I had only heard about the miniseries. And I think that was released in trade paperback eventually, and so was this. But I never did go back and read them. Honestly, the only thing I'd read from this omnibus previously was Sandman 25, and then some, not all, of the Children's Crusade stories in here that are collected. So all of this was brand new. And this is, I think, when the series really picked up. And she's not alone. Like, Crystal Palace, I still think her name is cool. She has some secrets of her own. This is her sister, Clementine. She lives in a windmill with her friend Miranda. She's a Buddhist monk. So she's a little bit different. And she comes with her own secrets as to what really happened to Crystal and her mother. And you can find out for yourself how that story wraps up. The last story that's collected in here is like a video game. Like, they go inside of this one here. They go inside of a video game. It didn't really feel like a final story. I feel like at this point they were just trying to wrap up some loose ends. So that's what the artwork in here looks like, because like I said, they're trapped inside the internet. They're trapped inside of a video game. Surprisingly, at the very end, after the main story is over, after the main series is over, it's where you're going to find Jill Thompson's stories. Now, she did some manga versions of Death and Sandman, but this is the manga adaptation of the Dead Boy Detectives. And in here, you're going to meet the two characters again of Edwin and Charles, but you're also going to meet the character of Anika and Michiko and Fiorenza. who are helping them out on a case, and this is the type of artwork to expect. This was originally released, I think it was in a Tankobon size book. And you do get some cameos there. There's an introduction by Neil Gaiman, and this is the Dead Boy Detectives when they show up in different annuals. Remember when I said that there was a big Vertigo crossover in the annuals? This is the Swamp Thing annual, Doom Patrol annual, and then the original pages, I think, is what's collected in here, of the Children's Crusade #2 that was expanded later on as is collected in here, but these are the original ones. Then we have some character designs here by Brian Talbot and John Todeben. And then the script right here. And more designs by Mark Buckingham. This is for the main ongoing series because there you have Crystal. And some of the characters that will be appearing through that series. Some sketches and pin-ups. And then some thumbnail sketches here by Mark Buckingham of the ongoing series. 7 Rules and 7 Butts of Being a Ghost. It's by Mark Buckingham. And then each of the 12 issues had a little puzzle piece at the beginning, and this is all the puzzle pieces put together. Now, when to read this before we look at the binding? I strongly suggest reading this after reading Sandman 75, the final issue of Sandman. At least get that out of the way. You can wait to read Overture after reading this, or the 5th volume if you have it in the absolute format. But I feel like this spoils one big thing that happens in the Sandman series. And I can't go into details. But for those of you that want to go into Sandman completely blind, I suggest reading this after Sandman. I think you would benefit from that, not being spoiled what ends up happening in the main pages of Sandman. Not that it affects this book in any kind of way. You don't even need to have read Sandman to enjoy this, which I'm thinking that's what the Netflix show, I believe it's Netflix, that's making this into a TV show, is hoping that you don't need to watch Sandman to enjoy a story about 2 dead boys that happen to be detectives trying to figure out some mysteries of the occult. And I don't know if Crystal's going to be in it or not, but I would love for her because she added so much to this particular story. Now, let's look at the binding. We have 800 pages, and it is sewn binding. Not much of an eye, but we've seen worse. We've seen a lot better, too. As far as the paper stock that they're using here, it is a little thinner. It seems like this is the new paper stock that they're using. Not that it's like super thin or anything. Nothing like the Conan Kurt Busiek Marvel book or the JMS first printing of Volume 1. But you're going to see more bleed through than what you normally would have seen. Like, say, for example, in the Sandman Omni, when that came out, or the Lucifer Omnibus, they use thicker paper. This does feel like a semi-glossy finish to it, but not a glossy finish like most of the other books have had in omnibus format. But there is a little bit of bleed through. As far as the way the book lays over, you do get minor gutter loss, but that's not a big deal because towards the beginning there's really not a lot of spread pages. There's just a lot of panels, but there are some, like here, where you do get some gutter loss. Just have to hold it down like that. But that's it. That, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this omnibus, don't forget to check out our sponsors.
If you're in Europe and you're interested in buying these books, definitely check out Walt's Comic Shop in Berlin, Germany. They have the cheapest pre-order prices, flat shipping rate of €12 for all EU countries, emails answered within 24 hours, waltscomicshop.com, and you can use the code nearmintcondition at checkout and get free shipping for all EU countries with your first order over €40. That's Walt's Comic Shop, your reliable source for omnis and premium collected editions in Europe. Ding!
CheapGraphicNovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget that CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the content, the page count, and build of this book. Let me know in the comments down below if you plan on picking it up, if you already have the Sandman Universe Classics Omnibus editions. What other Sandman classics you would love to see collected in omnibus format? I myself am still waiting one day for the Sandman Mystery Theater Omnis. I know we have compendiums, but it would be really cool, even though it has very little to do with Morpheus and the Dreaming. But anyway, if you have any questions, leave them down below. Don't forget to smash that like button. Check us out on Patreon and Spreadshop. Amazing ways to support the channel if you can do so. Everyone, stay healthy and safe out there. Much love.